to each other, which could be fun.
Okay, Michael, I've pulled in everyone.
Great. Well, let's get started. Well, it's great. Welcome to Homecoming 2020. Hopefully the only homecoming that's going to be like this. My name is Michael Goldberg. I am the executive director of our new Veal Institute for Entrepreneurship on campus. I'm also an associate professor at the Weatherhead School of Management. I am also a parent of 2 girls playing field hockey right here. And as any of you that are parents can appreciate, the kids in sports has been the one thing that saved our family this fall. So I'm here with you and then also cheering on my daughters. They're up 2-0 for anybody who's betting on the Laurel Orange High School field hockey game. So I know Jay has money on this game. I want to thank our friends at the Alumni Association for partnering with us on this panel. We are thrilled to get 5 of our great young alums that are doing amazing work in the entrepreneurship world, ranging from Cleveland to Chicago to San Francisco and Boston. So many of them I know in the past. Sandra Lin was nice enough to host our trek out to San Francisco and a group of students. And Allie, I just met for the first time this week, and I'm excited to meet her on campus soon. I'm going to turn it over. Our format, we're going to have Jay Sangani, who is one of our great students, moderate the discussion today. And the format's going to be Jay kind of running the show, taking questions. We'll have that for a half an hour, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms. So for those of us on campus that are living on Zoom, and I'm sure that's true for many of you, we're doing a lot of Zoom time and Zoom breakouts, and we thought it'd just be a nice opportunity to have more of a discussion. You'll have an option to sort of follow your favorite panelist into a breakout room if that works that way. So with that, let me turn it over to Jay, who's going to run the show, and thank you so much for being here today.
Alrighty, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's discussion. We're going to have we have a lot of great panelists today joining us, some young alumni entrepreneurs from CASE, and we're going to ask a lot of questions during this initial Q&A. And like Michael mentioned, we're going to have breakout rooms to follow. So I'm excited to start the session with all of you. And just to start off, if we could have each of our panelists give a quick introduction and just maybe a little bit about their time at CASE, just to spice up their introductions as well. So we can start with Ashi.
Awesome, thanks Jay. So hey everybody, my name is Ashi Batchu. I'm the founder and CEO for MC Squared Health. We're a healthcare technology company based in Oakland, California. A little bit about my time at CASE. Had a wonderful experience in the medical anthropology program, lived on Hessler, loved every minute of being on campus. Missed the snow and the cold actually, is one thing that I'm realizing being further away from the Midwest now out west. But yeah, just thrilled to be here. Great to chat with everybody. And Jay was a wonderful REP intern on the team with MC Squared Health. So it's great to be able to connect with him and everybody else on the panel.
We'll go over to John next.
Hey everybody, John Knific, co-founder, COO at Wiser. We power the new Crew Connect and Alumni Career Network at CASE. We've expanded quite a bit to offer a lot of virtual community solutions, which is timely for universities. I was actually a biology pre-med at CASE, and as you can probably tell, I am not a doctor currently. Ashi, I also lived on Hessler, very fun street. Don't know if we overlapped, but loved it. And great to be here.
Allie?
Hi. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. I lost power in between the hellos and this kicking off. Nice to see everybody. My name is Allie Briggs, 2011 grad. I'm the CEO and co-founder of LifeWeb 360. We help communities that have lost a loved one to gather memories and to support one another. So you can think of us sort of like memorial scrapbooks built by your friends and family. Time at CASE was great. Actually was in Pierce with Ashi our freshman year. And then I was at Delta Gamma, played Ultimate Frisbee, and had a lot of fun enjoying our beautiful Frank Gehry building on campus.
Felipe?
Thanks, and good to see everyone. It's good to be back, albeit virtually at Case for Homecoming. So I graduated in 2016 from mechanical and aerospace engineering. I'm the founder and CEO of a startup based in Boston called FGC Plasma Solutions. So we basically work on improving how you burn fuel for energy, aerospace, and defense. We're about a 9-person team right now, and it's been a really exciting journey. When I was at Case, I was on the swim team, so that was a lot of fun. Never lived on Hessler, but have fond memories of being on Hessler. I can't say I miss the cold, but Boston is a fairly similar climate, but I do definitely miss the people and the experiences.
And to round it out, we have an introduction from Sandra.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Lin. I'm the founder and CEO of KiwiCo. So we design and we deliver hands-on experiences for kids that are all centered around encouraging them to be creative problem solvers and innovators. I'm based out in California, so also in the Bay Area, but down in the Mountain View, Los Altos area. I feel very fortunate to be on this panel. I graduated in 1997, so I don't know if that actually qualifies me to be young, but I'm very, very lucky, I guess, to be on the panel. So I graduated with a degree in chemical engineering, minored in economics and biology. I played soccer on the varsity soccer team when I was there long ago, and have just great memories of my experience at Case.
Awesome. Thank you to all the panelists, and thanks again for joining us for this discussion. We're really excited and grateful for having you guys all here today. Before starting the Q&A, I just wanted to preface that we want to make this session as conversational as possible. So as much as these questions are going to be directed to specific panelists, we love for everyone to chime in whenever they can, and we'll try to keep it as fluid as possible. So to start off the questions, I want to ask my mentor, Ashi, what problems in healthcare inspired you to start MC Squared Health? And how did you encounter those problems in your experiences before you're starting MC Squared Health?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Thanks, Jay. So a little bit of background about myself, because I think that oftentimes with companies and founding startups, so much of the DNA of the founder and their experiences feeds into the DNA of the company. So my background, 10 years, was in healthcare administration. So that was finance, operations, and strategy. Worked with UCSF, Genentech, VA, Columbia Medical Center, variety of different specialties, and really was steeped in kind of like the healthcare system, so to speak. And so I had a really formative experience at UCSF where I was able to help them implement their electronic healthcare record Epic with the Department of Psychiatry. And through that experience, I was really able to get into kind of the nuts and bolts of clinical operations and understand, what worked well, what were we focusing on, and then by virtue of that, what were we not focusing on? And one thing that I continued to really be surprised about was the fact that there was a lot in the space of like patient engagement, patient experience that we weren't fully tapping into. Things like really confusing medical bills, or like not fully understanding what really insurance is doing towards making a payment for a medical bill, were things that I frequently kind of had to butt into with patients and providers on the clinic, like cutting room floor. And so that really informed kind of my desire, my appetite to go into producing like a health tech company. And so I really empathize with patients, providers, and health systems in terms of how challenging the health system is. And like that really fueled my interest and passions to get into the space of really helping to like simplify, modernize, streamline the billing experience in healthcare, which is just so chaotic and really a nightmare right now. So really excited to be part of the solution to that kind of that broader problem.
Okay, I am asking Sandra the next question. So Sandra, how did you overcome the challenges associated with starting your own company?
maybe I can tell you a little bit about the founding story for KiwiCo, and I can tell you a little bit about my background. So my career has mostly been in consumer products and technology, mostly e-commerce. So I'd started off working at Procter & Gamble, was at a couple of startups, ended up going to business school in Boston, and then basically going to the Bay Area and then working at PayPal and at eBay. And at the time I had actually left eBay, and I have 3 kids now, but my oldest 2 kids are almost 3 and almost 5. And I really wanted to give them experiences that were hands-on. I thought it was a great way for them to exercise their creativity. And it was something that I had done kind of growing up. And as I was pulling things together, I ended up basically saying this is taking a huge amount of time and effort. I feel like I should actually amortize this. So I invited my friends and their kids over. And one of my friends was like, this is amazing. You should really start a business around this. And my first thought was that it would be a really fun business to work on. But the question was whether or not it was actually going to be a viable business. So going to your question about a challenge, I would say one of the first challenges that I came across was actually trying to determine if there was an addressable market that really made sense to launch this particular business. And having come from some really big companies where you have a pretty sizable budget when it comes to market research and that type of thing, I was dealing with zero, right? And so I think what ends up happening is you end up becoming very, very resourceful, and basically did what I call kind of ghetto market research, and basically pulled together focus groups with friends and friends, got to learn SurveyMonkey very, very well. And I think the long story short is we found out that there are a lot of busy, well-intentioned parents out there who are looking for enriching activities for their kids. And if we can supply that in a format, that is something that people are willing to kind of buy and value. So that, I'd say that's definitely one of the bigger challenges that we had to begin with, but one that, like many challenges or opportunities, probably entrepreneurs probably are people who look at things in the light of opportunities versus challenges, but is one that we were able to figure out through a really resourceful way.
Okay, so I'm guessing that's my cue to ask the next question. So I'll try and keep this conversational. I have the privilege of talking to Felipe, and a little quick story here. So I am the co-founder of a startup as well, and we just graduated from a program through the Clean Energy Trust in Chicago. And so the first time I actually spoke to Felipe was when he was one of the keynotes this summer. So it's very exciting to actually be able to follow back with another CET alum. So Felipe, I just wanted to understand from you, and obviously I'd love to hear from a lot of the other founders here as well, because I think it's pretty applicable. How do you manage expectations as a very young founder, not having necessarily a whole lot of experience in other places, but, having to answer to advisors and investors and potential customers, and at the same time, try and manage the vision and, kind of progress of the company? It just seems like a lot of stuff to kind of balance. So what's your strategy been with that, or have you struggled with it?
Yes, short answer. So, it was great chatting earlier this summer. I didn't get a chance to follow back up with you, but I hope the rest of the Clean Energy Trust program went well. Yeah. So your question was about managing, I guess, time and expectations, right? Yeah, managing. So I think that in terms of managing time, I think the most important lesson I learned, which was bad for my GPA when I learned this and good for me as an entrepreneur when I learned this, is that one of the things you're going to give up as an entrepreneur is sort of the pursuit of perfection, right? Because a lot of the times you have to know when something is good enough and when the additional marginal work that you're going to do on something is going to bring you a smaller benefit that doesn't justify the amount of time that you're going to put into something. So I think one of the things that at least I've tried to learn is being very efficient at figuring out where my time is the biggest value add. And that becomes especially critical as you start growing a team. a personal note, it also means, making sure that you're going to be very busy. So making sure that you make, time for yourself and the things that are important to you. And making sure you do, set some boundaries even with customers and investors that you don't necessarily have to answer an email at 6 p.m. on a Sunday night all the time. In terms of how do you manage expectations with investors, customers, partners, mentors, I think that is, it's always about being upfront, especially with something technical, right? Being upfront about, here's what we're doing, here's the science, here are the risks that we foresee, here's what we're doing to mitigate them, but hey, this is experimental and, or, this is a startup and there's an inherent degree of risk in what you're doing. So at least for me, it was always, not necessarily highlighting all of the negative things, but being upfront about them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Felipe.
Sure, and good luck with the startup.
Thank you.
I have a question for Ali. But first I wanted to mention, so Felipe, you said you were on the swim team here. I'm a diver on the swim team, and I think that's pretty cool. It's really great.
Oh, that's awesome. It makes me feel a little old now that I don't know some of the new people on the team, but say hi to Doug and everyone for me.
Oh yeah, I
good luck this season.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So back to my question for Ali. I was just curious, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected your work in LifeWeb?
Yeah, I think COVID has impacted everybody's work in different ways. Certainly the way that we're all working. For us, if I think pre and post COVID, it's definitely been a lot of growth for us and an opportunity to have solutions where people are really looking for them in a time, when somebody dies, it's difficult without a pandemic. I would say the biggest change is before COVID, the problem that we really saw ourselves solving at LifeWeb is this time disparity that exists. When somebody dies, it's really awkward for the friends and relatives. They're not sure what to do, not sure what to say. Do I send a casserole? Do I send a card? And then after a few weeks or months, life happens and they move on. Meanwhile, you have the bereaved family that just lost their parent, child, sibling, spouse. They're in a state of shock. They can't take in the fact that their person has just died, and they can't take in all the love that they're getting. So they can't remember what's being said to them at the funeral. They can't make sense of the guest book that they get at the funeral. And so what we were really doing was harnessing that energy and preserving it for the family to come back to as this sort of gift when they're ready, and identifying that support network that we can engage to check in with the family right when they really need it. We're still doing that, but what happened with COVID is that onslaught of energy and support and love, I don't want to say that it evaporated, but it became much more difficult. So, especially in March, when there were no gatherings of 10 people, there's a lot of confusion. A lot of funeral homes were not set up for live streaming. We saw people just pushing off having any sort of event. And so if there's no funeral and there's no calling hours and you can't go to somebody's house, a lot of that support that the families were getting was just drying up. And so we did a few things at that time. One of them was we put out a free ebook on how to use Zoom to have a virtual memorial service. We created one version for funeral professionals and one version for families, because people were really proactively trying to figure out, what do I do? Really the first resource, and it was a really high quality resource. I spent about a week and a half painstakingly screenshotting Zoom and talking with funeral professionals and trying to make it a really robust guide. That drove a lot of traffic to our site, and so that is still driving growth today. But I think it's also helped us understand the role that we can play in people's lives, where there's a trend towards, I'll wrap this up without going into the details of the funeral industry. because we're in this strange time where people can't come together, they're realizing that a funeral is one event, but a memorial and commemorating and honoring can be many things, and they can happen many times, and they can happen at the 1-year anniversary and the birthday and whenever you want to celebrate that person. And people have to now be comfortable with that because we've sort of pulled apart this timeline. And so it's really exciting to see the role that a platform like LifeWeb can have to bring people together and not be technology for technology's sake or the end of the connection point, but really be technology bridging those offline connections. Yeah, it was a long answer.
Okay, so I have a question for John. And my question is, what mistakes have you made in creating your business? And if so, what have you learned from them?
So many, so many. Before I forget, there were two things just piggybacking on the past conversations. Sandra, I think what you're doing is brilliant. I have a 2 and a 4-year-old, and you've solved my 2-year-old's birthday. So thank you for that. And Allie, have you connected with Mike Belcito, who's a fellow Case grad?
Not yet, but Michael and I were talking about that this week. I hadn't made the connection, so
yeah,
I need to talk with him.
Yeah, it sounds like the death care / funeral market's a interesting one, and he was deep in it for a few years with eFuneral, so thought that might be helpful. So for mistakes, so I've run 2 companies in the education space. Just for a little more context, I started a company my senior year at Case called Decision Desk, which was originally to run virtual auditions for music schools. I was double majoring in music, and this was in 2008. And at that time, Facebook was fairly new, YouTube was fairly new. You couldn't really transmit HD video without mailing a DVD. And so we saw that these music schools were getting thousands of DVDs in the mail physically. And so we offered an upload and review service that we charged like $15 to $20 per recording to convert. And so that company ended up growing. We raised about 7 million in capital, grew to about 100 universities. That company ultimately didn't actually exit for a whole lot. One of the first big mistakes was there's such a key difference between understanding your product market fit and then understanding how to scale a company. Those are really different disciplines. And something that we conflated was the fact that we understood how to solve this very specific niche, and ultimately actually raised a little too much capital around that concept, thinking that we would expand that to doing video screening for executive search, for athletics. I have a couple really funky stories being in LA trying to meet casting directors, thinking it would be for virtual casting. And ultimately what we found was we took a problem that we had solved and had a really nice little piece of technology, but having a solution doesn't mean it will solve other problems, right? Your product market fit comes from understanding a pain and solving it, not having a feature and trying to figure out where to apply it, with the exception of maybe some, deeper hardcore technologies where you're finding an actual application. I'm talking about generally like apps, software, that kind of stuff. So that actually was a really costly mistake because it dismantled focus in the company, caused us to have to let some people go. We had to raise emergency capital. So that was, kind of a big one. The other, there's so many, but I'll give you one more. I had an advisor say once that it's great to save people money, but making people money is even better. And that's a tricky concept because sometimes you're in the service and you hear some of these other ventures we're talking about where you're your value proposition isn't necessarily money. The value is love, time with your kids, compassion. So value comes from lots of different things, but at the end of the day, understanding the value or ROI is so mission critical. And this is one that's actually maybe an overshare given the audience, but Case Western was one of our first pilot partners for Wiser, which is the company I started right after Decision Desk. And we started this company focusing on connecting students with alumni for valuable career conversations. Case has been very successful in that. The University of Chicago has been very successful in that. But something tough we learned is if that network didn't already exist, it was hard to mine value from scratch for schools that didn't already have a really powerful network to tap into. And so we ended up pivoting the company to focus on connecting prospective students with trained student peers and mentors in order to help recruit more students to the university, which serves a bottom line metric, a yield and enrollment metric for all the other institutions that are less prestigious than say a Case Western or a U Chicago. And we were fortunate in figuring that out because it quadrupled the growth rate of the company over the past year and almost 3x our average sales price, because you can point to a real bottom line ROI. Because if you're not sure what your ROI is, even if it's a cool product and it kind of scratches a few itches, it's really hard to understand the heartbeat of what makes the organization scale. So that's kind of like my pre-market fit, my post-market fit learnings.
Thank you.
Awesome. Just a quick update. So we will not be doing the breakout section, and we'll be continuing with the panel Q&A. But I do see a couple of guests have just joined us during this Q&A, and I just wanted to thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll monitor that and allow you guys to speak. Us students, we're going to go into next round of questions. So please feel free to, flood the chat room with any of your questions. So I just wanted to actually ask a follow-up to John. You were actually a speaker in my entrepreneurial finance class a couple of classes ago, and I found your journey very fascinating from, biology pre-med to entrepreneurship. And I feel like at Case, a lot of students feel like they need to find a path and stick to that path. So I wanted to, I guess, maybe get some advice that you can draw from your experiences in terms of navigating a path that necessarily wasn't the right path for you and being able to, see the light of the tunnel and also, make that transition.
Yeah, I think for me, it was just ultimately being honest with myself, which is also something that happens in entrepreneurship a lot. Sometimes Felipe had a really good example of, can you be honest with yourself if you're overworking a problem because you're the kind of person who's really good at solving problems, but it might not actually be the right thing to be spending your time on, right? But related to my undergraduate experience, I went to Case on the pre-professional scholarship program. So I kind of had a golden ticket to Case Med. And that was a really hard thing to achieve in high school, right? So when I went to Case, I felt really compelled to sort of fulfill that gift that I was given. But I was always really passionate about music. I was very close to deciding just to go to a conservatory until I actually got that pre-med acceptance. And I was like, this is kind of a smarter life choice. So I was double majoring in music, and something always nagged at me that I just wasn't doing something I was very excited about. And when I started to meet more people who were actually physicians who loved what they do, sort of like, this is going to be rough if I don't truly love what I'm going to do. And so I would say I'm lucky in the fact that I had a very supportive family. My parents are both music professors that just retired. So, I mean, they were always baffled why I'd want to go into medicine in the first place. I think what was, for me, and this is, I think, the case for a lot of people, it became so obvious to me that everything else kind of melted away. Again, bad for GPA, I remember like my senior year at Case sitting in microbio, just toiling away at our website and like just barely getting a C in that class. And again, that's not great advice to a student per se, but the decision became so, I was just infected with this idea of having to start this thing. I was basically obsessed. And so that was sort of, and my advice, I guess, like everyone's journey is different. For someone who's still who's trying to find that path, I think there's just analysis. There's so much data out there. There's so much information. I think our newest generation of students unfortunately has sort of an analysis paralysis because you have unlimited data at your fingertips. Everyone's a digital native. You know somebody that does everything. And so sometimes just jumping in, getting your feet wet and learning with some mistakes is actually the right thing to do. But sometimes that's the scariest for an overachiever kind of personality. And I'm speaking to a bunch of Case students and Case alums, right? So a lot fall into that category. I don't know if that's helpful.
I wanted to
Thank you.
riff real quick, John, on something that you said. I think that like it really resonated from mine. I think that like there's a series of different kind of like ironies to being like a founder, right? The founder mindset's like a really interesting one because like you want to get work done, you want to be the problem solver, you want to be a perfectionist, but at the same time, there's diminishing returns, you know, to Felipe's point about how long you spend on a certain problem before needing to shift gears and address another problem. And then also, there's always kind of like this challenge, how to say it, that you have to kind of recognize when you're in the early stages of putting together a product or service that you really deeply understand the area that you're working because you've researched it so thoroughly, you're putting together a solution for that space. But there has to be that point where you say like, is this a service-based company? Is this like a product that I'm really going to productize and turn into a scalable business? Like, what am I? And I think like, and I saw this tweet thread that was really interesting. I'll drop it into the chat comments when I find it, where there's a really like familiar founder journey. And I definitely experienced this on my end, where we launched the service based on something that I knew incredibly well, but it wasn't a scalable business. And it was hard to learn that because you're actually generating revenue, you're producing value. But if you can't productize or create really a scalable business from that, you know, that's okay. But you have to be real with yourself about what side of that line are you on? Are you a service or are you really a product that can scale and grow? Because that really influences the direction in which you can take a company. And just to tie it back, like I think it's so fascinating in the space because when you're an entrepreneur and you're diving into this like world, you like will take a problem and you'll optimize it, and you'll optimize it so far that sometimes you forget to take a step back and say, well, where did I go wrong? Where did I maybe miss that pivot from being a pure service to maybe needing to figure out how to productize this and then pivot my business to really like blow it out of the water, grow it really big, if that's your goal, you know, raising a bunch of VC capital and kind of going that route. So it's a different journey for everybody, but I find these paradoxes and the mindsets to be so fascinating as a founder as you're going through that journey. So just wanted to kind of connect a few different topics that were brought up.
I couldn't agree more. The lessons from my first venture were rough because almost like a good student, I took a lot of time to procure advisors from venture-backed companies and then sort of really put myself in this mindset that, well, you do the seed and then you raise a series A and then you raise a series B and then you go after the bigger market. Unlike, you know, Sandra, for example, you actually came from companies where you had to build things before you went out and said, I'm going to go do something on my own. So for me, like there were times when, just as an example, like it never dawned on me that we could just be content with the venture we had and that we should just become profitable. And then I could go try to solve another problem. Like you, like Ashi, like you're talking about, like you can just get so fixated on a path that you've pre-designed for yourself that you can really miss stuff you're driving right past, a lot of obvious stuff.
Okay. Oh, I also wanted to mention that I'm actually coming to you guys from Hessler, to all of the alum who had lived there. So love living on Hessler. My question is for Allie. So what inspired you to start LifeWeb, given that it's kind of such a, unique, unique industry?
Yeah, I started LifeWeb during business school at Kellogg, and 4 months after graduating, I was at the National Funeral Directors Association convention in Chicago, surrounded by hearses. And I took a mental snapshot and thought, if you'd asked me before business school, what's happening in this frame, I would have been very confused what was going on. What inspired me to start LifeWeb was part of a class that I took at Kellogg called New Venture Discovery, which is really around human-centered design and taking a problem, not starting with the solution, but really starting with the problem and doing those long-form interviews and ideating to come up with something that might meet the need. And the problem that my team was working on in the class was really around pains associated with the funeral. Interviews with people that had planned a funeral, which means somebody in their life had died. We talked with a friend of apartment fire over 10 years ago, and they had this big age gap. So when we were talking with Josh, what he told us was that the funeral planning part was actually a cinch. What was really hard was the fact that they had this age gap. He only knew his brother as this older person in his life, and he didn't get to know what his brother was like out on a Saturday night or on the company softball team, except for talking with his brother's friends. And he said, it's been years, and naturally connections with people start to fade. And I'm terrified that I'm going to lose my connection with those friends and the parts of my brother that are living on with them. And hearing that word terrified in the interview process was really powerful. I feel really strongly that if you find the deepest pain point that you can and you just keep focusing on it, pick a really hard problem, you're bound to find something that succeeds because there's such real pain there. And so that's really our origin story. Is fortunately not a personal loss from myself or my co-founder. What's been really exciting though, people ask us a lot, like, isn't it sad working in end of life, working in death? And it's really not. It's really focused on the person's life. That's the angle that we take, which cascades down into a lot of product design decisions that we've made. But we've really created a space where people can acknowledge other people that are meaningful to them and sort of pay tribute to them. And when somebody has died, we kind of hold space for conversations in a way that we don't in our day-to-day lives. And so we end up with this really great, almost social media for the soul kind of platform that's really about bringing people together. It's about shared experience. It's about honoring people in our lives. And so it's kind of come full circle where it's really about life for us. It's about celebrating essentially the greatest hits of somebody's life and being a space of, here's how they showed up in the world. And we use LifeWeb. We adapted it for my grandma's 90th birthday, which was in April. So you can imagine there's a lot of ways that, when you're in those moments where you really want to acknowledge somebody in a big way, there's a lot of directions that we could go. That's where we came from.
You're awesome. Thank you so much for that, Allie. That was actually really awesome. Great to hear about that. My next question is directed towards Sandra. This is actually something that I wanted to ask you on the track last year, but we just ran out of Q&A time. You kind of, at least from the outside looking in, it seems like you're sort of mounting an uphill battle, or at least were at some point, where you decided to go out and start this kind of very tactile early education, service in a period of time where children become increasingly glued to screens like iPads and iPhones and stuff like that, and investors are increasingly glued to investing only in SaaS. So Can you talk a little bit about how you approach this, I guess, from a strategy perspective in terms of scaling the business, knowing that the fundraising, I guess, avenues are a bit more limited, and how you actually manage to get yourself into the market and kind of carve out this niche that you're doing so well in?
Mm-hmm. So I think fundamentally, if you go back to the point about looking at consumer needs, so a little bit touching on what Ali just said too, about how she really honed in on a particular pain point. I mean, I think we had a really good understanding of what the pain points were for the combination of what we call the grown-up assistants, which are really the parents, as well as the kids. Because if you think about what we're doing, we're providing an experience for the entire family. So it was really important that we understood that from all angles. And ultimately, you know, we're not an anti-digital experience, but we fundamentally believe that a physical and a tactile and a hands-on experience is something that is really important. So if you think about how do materials interact with one another, if you think about spatial relationships, etc., like that type of creative problem solving is not something you can necessarily get through a digital experience. And so I think kids love playing. They love playing with physical things in addition to digital things, as long as it's fun. And that was something that was really important to us, is yes, we want it to be enriching, but first of all, it has to be fun, or else the kids are not going to actually be interacting with it. And then for parents, they also fundamentally understand that this is something that would be valuable for their kids, because ultimately I think parents want their kids to grow up with the creative confidence to be able to tackle whatever challenges come their way. And this is one way for them to start to get some of that confidence, some of that creative confidence, some of that problem solving skill set. So we knew that there was something there, right? And we had to prove that out. And in terms of kind of going to your question about raising capital and like our journey around that, we were very fortunate to begin with. We ended up raising our seed round of financing before we actually launched. And so we are an e-commerce direct to consumer company. At the time, subscription businesses were actually kind of hot. And that's our core business model, is that we ship out on a monthly basis, something delightful for kids and families. And we were able to position the need, as well as at the time, when you think about seed rounds of financing, they're very much looking at the team too. And so we were again fortunate that we had a team that happened to be relatively connected, kind of given our backgrounds here in the Valley. After that, we raised a Series A round of financing based on traction, really. So we did a preemptive Series A, and then we did an add-on. But after that, it's interesting hearing the discussion about, okay, once you're on that venture track, do you continue on that venture track? Or are there alternative ways in which you can think about actually looking at your capital needs and how you want to grow the business? And for us, for a variety of reasons and dynamics, we ended up basically, it's been 5 years now that we've been cash flow positive and profitable. So we haven't had to raise additional equity financing. And I think that there's a temptation when you're in kind of the venture world to look at that number, that dollars raised, and think that that equates to success. And some level it does, right? It's because some investor is saying, wow, like I believe in what you're doing, like here's some more money, here's more capital. And so in some respects it is. But in other ways, it isn't necessarily the case. And so I think it's something to be aware of, and to be, as you start on an entrepreneurial journey, to recognize that there are different ways to go about doing things. And because we've raised all in a little north of $10 million in equity financing, the team has a lot of equity. They have a lot of ownership. We're able to really kind of control our destiny when it comes to eventual outcomes for the business. And so there are a number of things that I think are favorable about the way that we've gone about actually looking at the financing, the way that we've actually grown the business. But it isn't necessarily what you would think might be conventional wisdom if you think about venture-backed startups and venture-backed companies. But it's been an interesting journey kind of all along the way.
Awesome. Thank you.
I would like to direct a question toward Felipe. So you mentioned that you work with plasma technology to help improve emissions. And since climate change is really important to me, and especially today, I was wondering if the plasma technology could help combat climate change, and if so, in what ways could it do that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and that's absolutely one of the things we are aiming to do, right? So basically what we do is primarily focus on emissions from burning different types of fuels, right? And, you know, unfortunately for many sectors of the economy, you're going to have to burn something, right? So particularly we focus on air travel, and in air travel, it's going to be really difficult to get away from burning some sort of fuel to push planes around, just because of the energy density that you have in jet fuel, which is really difficult to match with any other source, right? So because you're going to have to burn something, it's important for that process to be as efficient as possible. So what we do, right, what our technology can do is basically it can enable jet engines to run, basically to idle at a reduced fuel consumption. So think of, like, you know, newer cars that when you sit at a light, they turn off, and that's to save fuel, you know, from idling when you're not driving, when you're just standing there waiting for the light to turn green. Our system can sort of do the equivalent, or we hope it can eventually do the equivalent for jet engines, right, by helping them to save fuel on the runway. Overall, that could be equivalent to fuel savings of around 2-ish% for the aviation industry, which doesn't sound like a lot, but could be extremely significant in an industry that's really hard to decarbonize. There's other benefits as well for how you could use that in gas turbines for power production, which are going to be an important part of our grid. You know, as more renewables come online, sometimes you need some sort of other device, right, that can generate power when it's cloudy or when the wind isn't blowing, and that relies on basically on gas turbines, and we can potentially help make those more efficient. So it's absolutely a big motivator for us. At least one of the things that we've seen is that, you know, in order to actually commercialize the technology that's going to have a positive impact on climate, there has to, has to make business sense as well, right? So we focus on saving fuel for people, and by saving fuel, that saves money, and that also reduces emissions.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I believe Benji had the last question.
Yeah. So I was going to ask my question to Ashi, and my question is, in what ways have you benefited from being a CEO?
Benefited by being the CEO. My sleep schedule has changed. I don't know about benefits. Could you, I'd love to like probe that question a little bit further. Can you what are some benefits that maybe?
Yeah. Like what have you learned from it or gained by having that position?
Yeah, totally. So knowledge. Yeah. I mean, I went into startups with the mindset that extremely high risk of failure, very curious and hungry to learn, and willing to take the risk for that kind of trade-off of knowledge. I think the big conversation that I hear all the time is you can go get an MBA or you can go do a startup. I think that that's not really the best comparison, but there's some strands of truth to it. You learn a lot by going and doing a startup that you would, learn maybe through business school or a variety of different ways through life. For me personally, in this experience, really to get a little bit more tactical, I think the biggest thing that I have found to be beneficial, rewarding from a knowledge standpoint has been that I've taken this journey of what happens within the four walls of a hospital or provider organization, and I've translated that into what can that knowledge be used for to really drive meaningful, impactful change out in the market. I think that so often in the healthcare space, I think this is really common with Case and Case having a lot of pre-meds, and as somebody who is pre-med and then got into a hospital, it's really hard to break through in healthcare. is really niche knowledge, really protected networks. Secrets are safeguarded under lock and key, it feels like a lot of times. I had a grad school professor at Columbia talk about getting into working at a hospital as like breaking into the walls of a castle, basically. So it's like that high, that difficult to kind of get into the space and understand what's going on. And so like, what's been really rewarding for me is to be able to take a lot of that knowledge, bring it outside, collaborate with people, and provide like meaningful tools, services, knowledge, conversations, you name it, and just kind of take it to the next level from there. So that's what I found to be really rewarding, is like translating that knowledge and also like helping other people learn along the way. Having Jay on the team, I hope like we were able to do that a little bit through the REP internship. Yeah, I mean, that about sums it up to the best that I could think of at this point.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, thank you, panelists, for answering all your questions. We're going to ask one last closing question to all of you. And today you sort of navigated through several themes in your journeys as entrepreneurs, such as being honest with yourself, being able to have that, the insight to look forward and, plan forward and plan a couple steps forward. And also, the importance of having that self-awareness and management in your journeys. So just to sort of close this session today, I wanted to ask a question about on advice that the best sort of advice you can give young entrepreneurs here at CASE and that are just getting started. And anyone can go ahead and take a stab at that.
Yeah, I guess I'll start that off. So I would say that the most important thing, and it's important for entrepreneurship, but I think it's important too, as your 4 years at CASE will go by really quickly, and you need to start in the real world. I think it's about finding the intersection of what you are passionate and good at, and also finding some way where you can benefit the world, right? So that may be a startup, right? That may be you working on a technology or an idea or a product that's hopefully one day going to go into the market and improve something about our society. But it may not be. I would say in general, you just want to find that intersection where it's something you can work really hard and really passionate about, and find some fulfillment. Entrepreneurship, for example, is really, really hard. I'd be lying if I think any entrepreneur would be lying if they said that the potential exit wasn't part of the motivation. But I think you also really need to do it because you want to make a difference in something, right? And for me, being able to hold on to those two pieces of motivation has been, one of the essential parts of my entrepreneurship journey, but I think it's generalizable to many career paths.
Are we jumping in?
Yeah.
So the advice that I would give, I will pass on from advice that I heard later in my career. So I didn't start thinking, out of CASE that I was going to start a company. I didn't even go to business school thinking that I was going to start a company. One of my professors at Kellogg, who's an entrepreneur, he has an analogy called like sliding down the brontosaurus. So if you picture like the back of a dinosaur, and at the top of the dinosaur's back, those are big companies, Fortune 500 companies, consulting firms, and all the way down at the tippy tail is you're a founder or co-founder. You're going from 0 to 1. You're at that really early stage, and in between there's all sorts of different sizes of companies. And what he recommends is starting at the top and soaking up all those resources from companies that have enough cash flow to be able to invest in you, and managers that are able to invest in building up really great habits for you, things like project management that are critical if you're going to one day run your own company, and then taking those skills and seeing how far down the brontosaurus you want to slide. And not everybody wants to go all the way down. Some people want to be like a founding team member, and so you're helping stage you're at. There's a lot of different ways to participate in entrepreneurship, and even if you stay at a large company, you can be an entrepreneur. I used to work at PepsiCo, and like we had a large innovation team, and it's the same process. They just have a lot more resources to work with, and so there's just a lot of different ways that you could participate. So I would if you're thinking about entrepreneurship, don't think that you have to do it right after business school or right after undergrad. In fact, there might be other pathways that will help you be successful once you decide to go that route.
I'll jump in just because I have an analogy as well when it comes to large companies and small companies. I appreciate the dinosaur one, and Jay, or who was it? I guess Rohan, maybe you were on the trek, right? And so I think I may have mentioned this on the trek, but one of the analogies that I have about big company versus small company, having experience at both, so Procter & Gamble and eBay versus as employee number 5 and then starting a company, is I kind of think of the large company as being a little bit like being kind of in Uber Black a little bit more. So it's like a relatively smooth ride. Like you'll feel some of the bumps kind of along the way. You can appreciate things that are going on around you, and that type of thing. And then being an entrepreneur is kind of like, or being at a really small startup is kind of like being on a rickety bicycle. And so like you'll really feel the hills, right? Like you're like pedaling uphill. It's really tough, or you will hit that pothole and it will be like really painful, but it's exhilarating too, right? So you're going downhill, you're going around those curves, like you can feel that, and your hands are on the handlebars. So you're making an impact, you're contributing and all that. And so that's one of the things that, one of the ways I would think about those opportunities. There's some great things about what you can learn at a big company, but as you graduate and as you're looking at your career and you're looking at jobs, I think it's kind of easy to look at opportunities or offers and think about like the money first, or something, something that's very quantifiable. But what I'd also encourage you to think about is the learning part of it. So like how steep is that learning curve? What can I get out of this? Because it's a two-way street. Like not only is that company getting something from you, obviously, but you're trying to get something from that experience and from that company too. So I try to look at that relatively holistically when weighing and considering the things that you might want to do next.
I would really just piggyback on the last two comments, which isn't advice I took myself. I just dove right in with the ramen noodles and starting out a college route. But there is so much to be learned by other companies and people who are doing things and have spent the money and time and resources and gone through the layers of hiring to figure out how to do things right. So the more you can try to absorb those from other people, the better, so you don't have to make the mistakes yourself. And this one might be pretty simple, but it's, I think, really hard to do. But if you feel the entrepreneurial bug, but you're not really sure what you're going to start, when you take that first job, live below your means, put away as much money as possible, because a lot of people who who never feel like they can go start that company, it's not because they're not passionate about it, it's because they get accustomed to a certain lifestyle. And I'll make up numbers, but you're 5 years into your job, you're about to punch into 80, 90K a year. If that's all going towards your living, it's going to be really hard to turn that off entirely to go jump and start something. It's going to be a lot more painful than having not had it in the first place. So time value and money, and just that window of time is just really precious to be able to jump in and put everything into that startup. So sometimes I say it is the least risky to just jump in and do it out of school, because you don't have much that you're putting up to risk. But that being said, if you can have the best of both, it would be absorb it from other companies and save up so you can parlay those skills and give yourself a year or two to actually run at it.
Real quick for mine, because I know we're at 3 already, just to chime in. I personally subscribe to the idea that grit is the greatest intrinsic indicator of success. And although that's the case, I think that far too often we don't look around us and look at the support systems that also make us successful. You know, founders live with families that support them. They have partners, you know, boyfriends, girlfriends, wives, husbands, partners, whatever, that do all kinds of things behind the scenes. So like really taken to stock, you know, the importance not just of you being able to do this idea and try really hard to make it work, but also that you have to build that ecosystem around you to also be truly successful. And, you know, from my personal standpoint, if I didn't have my wife, like I wouldn't have been able to go on this journey. And like, that is something that I reckon with and appreciate every day. So I've really just, you know, pointing that out, you know, how important that is for folks, definitely for myself.
Awesome. And with that last question, we have concluded today's discussion. So if everyone could unmute themselves and give a round of applause to today's panelists and participants for today's session.
Woo! Thank you.
Really
And
enjoyed the insights, guys.
I'm going to hand it over to Doug if you have any additional announcements.
Sure. Thank you, Jay, so much for leading today's session. And thank you, Ashi, Bridget, Rohan, Sandra, Felipe, Elena, Ali, Benjamin, and John for being a part of this. And thank you to Alumni Association for putting all of this together. We really appreciate everyone's partnership in going to support CASE. And you know, we hope you have a great homecoming. I know it's not quite the way we all wanted to celebrate, but you know, we're all one community here and we're happy to be a part of it. So thanks again for your time, and stay engaged with us, please. Have a great rest of your night.
Thanks, everyone.